Today's episode comes with the channel's first content warning. Discussed are themes such as, but not limited to, war, death, and suicide. If these are topics that are not for you, then please tune in next week. However, if these are things you do want to learn more about and hear about, then sit back as former specialist David Bates and I catch up after many years apart. Hear about his 3 tours of duty, life before, during, and after the war, as well as the constant battle with mental health. This episode is also near and dear for the both of us for many reasons, and with that being said, before we kick off, remember help is out there. If friends or family aren't around, there's always outlets such as the Suicide Prevention Hotline. We have both personally used it in our past, and the number will be found in every episode linked below. Especially in these trying times, remember, you are loved, and there's light at the end of the tunnel. Welcome back to The Bomb with AUZZYNAPALM, the most explosive podcast in Kingston, Ontario. And friends, today I am joined with former specialist and 4-tour veteran, my friend David Bates. David, thank you so much for being with me today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Correction, it was only 3. I did 2 tours for Iraq, and number 3 was Afghanistan. I was asked by a lieutenant to do a 4th, and I declined.
And I'm sure we'll touch on that too later in the interview. And very interesting that you brought that up. And thank you for correcting me. One of the big things that I think everyone usually asks when it comes to someone who is not only in the military, but spent as much time in it as you did. Growing up, was that something instilled, say, from parents where was your father in the military, your grandfather, or is it something you came to on your own accord?
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. So my childhood was messed up. I bounced around between my mom, dad, my grandparents. I finally settled in with my grandparents. My grandfather, his name is Jim Holt. He was a retired major in the Army. He's a Vietnam veteran. And he didn't push it, but it was a family, like love of country, patriotism. These were things that were instilled. I mean, we always had an American flag flying in the yard. Love God and country. That's how it was.
Right.
But it wasn't a thing to push. I got there on my own because I was in college. I was a music major. And all I did was party and chase girls like a typical 17-year-old child does. And it was stupid. So I looked at the military as an opportunity to grow up and learn how to get my crap together and be a functional adult and contributing member of society.
So it was that need of structure in your life that inevitably was the draw for you?
Exactly. That in a little bit, keep in mind, I enlisted in 2004, so 9/11 was still relatively fresh. You know, we had a very different mind of thinking because we didn't have the information then that we do now. You know, it was a very different time. I felt that not only did I kind of need to get my stuff together, but if I was going to do something for my country, probably about the best time I could do it.
Well, absolutely. And one of the interesting things I think is you were doing your first tour when I was just going into high school. So the contrast there, to me, has always been something that is just such an eye-opener on the different walks of life people take. Because there's only 5 years between us. But as I said, I was starting grade 9 and essentially the next chapter of my life. And you were starting yours, but how different they were is...
Oh, absolutely.
What a stark contrast. Now, how long were you in training and everything before actually going overseas? Because it's not immediate, is it?
It can be. To become an infantryman at the time, it was 14 weeks of training. They call it one station unit training at Fort Benning, Georgia. Fort Benning, Georgia is where all infantrymen in the United States Army are trained.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Now,
I can also
sorry to cut you off here. Is there a reason specifically for that?
It's just easier. There are several places to do basic training. Some of them specialize, like at the time, Fort Knox was where all the armored guys went, like tanks. Fort Sill was all artillery. And the reason they do that is because in order to train these things in number to, support a size as large as ours,
right,
you have to dedicate a lot of resources to training. So you need the space to do it.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
So that's a lot of it. So to go back, it was 14 weeks at Fort Benning, Georgia. Now that's just for an infantryman. And it's changed since then. After that, I reported for duty at Fort Hood, Texas in September of 2004. And most of the guys that I reported with were from my basic training unit. There was some 200 of us there. The last couple of days that we were in processing, They pulled some 20 dudes, including one of my best friends from training. And they're like, hey guys, you are no longer going to 4th Infantry Division. You're going to 1st Cav Division. They're in Iraq. You're going to be there in about 30 days. Godspeed, good luck. And within 30 days, they were over in the sandbox, fresh out of training.
And is there selection process for that, or is it completely random? Was it the luck of the draw on that?
Completely needs of the Army.
So it could have been anyone, and it just happened to be your buddy and those other soldiers.
Yeah, basically, what it is it was literally just, I need these many bodies. Okay, here's this many bodies. Yeah.
That's really wild. And in my head, I get it. Bodies matter, the manpower matters, but at the same time, throwing someone in without that training too can be a little hit and miss in my head, right?
Yes and no. The thing is, every infantryman learns the same things at Fort Benning when you go. You learn your basic battle drills, how to function as a member of a team, and most importantly, you learn how to follow orders. Because let me tell you something, being able to follow orders when you have a bunch of metal flying past your face is a very crucial skill. But the thing, once you get to a unit, like we had replacements when I was in Iraq, my first tour, fresh out of training as well. They already know the basics. That's fine. We can work with that. The unit specific standards, like how we do certain little things, like how do we who carries a breaching kit to go into a house, that will change squad to squad, platoon to platoon, unit to unit. We can work with that on the fly. That's fine. As long as they can follow orders, we're good.
Now, was your specific position, because you were a specialist, was there something that you did that not everyone else could do?
Oh, no. Specialist is just a rank. And it's really kind of a holdover from like World War II.
Okay.
You know how, so specialist, there are 2 ranks at E4. There's specialist and corporal. And the difference is who's the leader. The corporal between the two, even though they're the same grade, they get the same pay, the corporal's the leader because he's a non-commissioned officer. Now, back in the World War II times, just as their specialist and corporal, they used to have Spec 5, Spec 6, and these mirrored NCO ranks, but they weren't leaders. They usually had some kind of a technical, specialty. But a lot of that stuff has gone off to the wayside, but they've kept that E4 rank. And I think that mostly it has to do with, because like a corporal, you'll get that because you're about to become a sergeant. You've passed the promotion board. You're waiting on maybe to make a number of points to qualify or something like that. But it's really, I think that's what it is. It's to incentivize that drive to get promoted and to get out of that lower enlisted grade. I think that's the only reason it still exists.
Now, when you went over, as you said, it was right at the peak of the tensions after 9/11. What was that like leaving home, and how did your family react? Were they proud and encouraging, or were they scared? Combination of the two?
Oh, naturally, all of it. My grandfather, he was an Army officer. He was a captain. And for a while, his story is crazy. That's for another time. But, he went to Vietnam in 1968 during Tet. He was stationed at Chu Lai and Dak Po. In both of those places, he saw action. So he knew exactly what I was going into. Oh, not exactly. He has an inkling. Individual combats may vary. Most everybody was very supportive, scared, but, they all understood why I was doing it. I believed at the time, I believed in the mission. I loved my country, still do. So it was really kind of a mixed time, but at the same time, nobody wanted to take my eyes off the prize. You know what I mean? I had a mission that I was about to go on and try to accomplish, and they wanted me to focus on that.
Did you ever falter beforehand? Was there any?
Oh God, no. No, well, you know this from my character. I'm kind of by the book to a fault. I'm honest to a fault. So that was not a thing for me. That would have violated my integrity, I think, in a way that to me would have been personally irredeemable.
And as I'm kind of structuring this in a way that trying to go in the timeline before we actually get to overseas, I actually had a good question come in from one of the new patrons, and he asked, knowing you were going into war, you had to be somewhat aware of the chances and high possibility you were going to have to take someone's life. How did that affect your mindset, mental health, and was that difficult to adjust to for you, especially being 18 years old?
So check this out. One of the things that's actually a really good question. And as a part of my undergraduate degree, I took a class on the psychology of terrorism. And really, we actually really covered something like this really well. So I actually have a good answer. And I'm really proud of myself for that. I don't have many good answers. But so honestly, we don't really think about it because the military uses a lot of sanitizing language. So you don't refer to
And,
an enemy
and what do you
combatant.
mean by sanitizing language?
Oh, I got you, my friend. So sanitizing language is it's language we use to take away the humanity. And it's not necessarily to make them less than human. It's not like that. But we use terms like enemy, target, threat. These are objectifying. It's not demeaning in any way, but it's what you remove the humanity from it so that you're looking at it as an object.
Right.
It's impersonal. Even though the act of killing is very personal and very intimate, it gets you in that mindset. So then when the moment comes, hopefully your training will take over. You won't hesitate and you'll do what you've been trained to do.
I've actually heard the same mentality applied to video game logic, where even if you're aware you're playing an online game against other real people, if you treat them as AIs, it just instantly helps cut that stress of the end game and whatnot. So not to compare the two, but I do see that parallel minds.
Absolutely.
I understand what you mean by sanitizing. Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly what it is. So and also when you address a group by, say, a group name, like the Taliban, that's a pretty amorphous label, Al Qaeda.
Right. It's a group, not individuals as a whole.
Yep. So it makes it easier because you're not thinking of it as a person. It's a thing. And so when you look at things as things and objects, it's very easy to just kind of let your training do what needs to be done. The other thing is that you also kind of understand going into it that you are going into a fight. This is real life. This is life and death. So it's really easy to tell yourself anyway that I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm coming home. Mm-hmm. At least that's the plan.
As you mentioned earlier as well, you're a man of God. How does that play into what we were just discussing there, that sanitizing training? Because again, being spiritual and again, a man of God, you have to be somewhat aware that you are taking a life at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And the Bible does differentiate between murder and war. The two are very different things. And I think a lot of it, I really believe that the morality of it has to do with intention. If my intention is to kill you for enjoyment, yeah, that's absolutely horrendous. That's aberrant. That's sinful. That is dead wrong. But in the case of, let's say, fighting to overthrow a dictator, is that, obviously you're going to have to eliminate his side and reduce its number. Is that necessarily sinful? And that is a very deep philosophical rabbit hole. But I believe in my faith, there is a difference.
Well, and of course, and that wasn't meant as a accusation, more just
no.
Trying to understand how the two mentalities can play together. Because as you said at the start too, America, God, and military, those three tiers are very much part of each other, building blocks of America.
Yeah, absolutely.
So 2004 September, is that when you first went overseas then?
No, that's when I reported for duty at Fort Hood, Texas. I was very fortunate, and before I deployed for my first tour, I got about a year and a half's worth of training, in total. So September of 2004 until November of 2005 was dedicated to training.
So you had nearly 6 months training on those 14 guys you mentioned earlier who got taken out early.
Almost a year.
Oh my goodness! Wow.
Yep. Plus the time and basic training, you put it. It's almost a year and a half. So I was very fortunate. I got to go through multiple, the months of January, February, March, April, and part of May in 2005. I think I might have spent 3 solid weeks in my barracks room. The rest of it, we were out in the field training. We did a 30-day rotation.
Sleep.
Go ahead.
Pretty much just sleep spent in the barracks.
No, it was to wash your clothes, clean your equipment, repack it, and go back out. I mean, but this unit, when I reported for duty, 4th Infantry Division had just returned from the Iraq invasion. And so they were gearing up for another fight like that. So the training was very intense. It was constant, and thank goodness for it, honestly. But that training during that time, that block, we did a series of training at Fort Hood. We spent 30 days at the Joint Readiness Training Center in Fort Polk, Louisiana. we did more training at home base, and then we had a culminating exercise at the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California, to get our unit certification that we were mission ready to go overseas.
Was there anything in training too that people might not assume instantly when thinking of military training? Experiences that are special to you, or was it just train, train, train?
So, let me tell you, dudes in the field are some of the biggest clowns on the planet. A little bit of backstory for me. If my first team leader, his name was Corporal White, if I ever saw him in the street, I'd hit him in the mouth one good time. I owe that dude. He was a jerk. He was the kind of he was the type of dude that looked for fault because he got off on yelling at you. He was that dude.
So the stereotypical like media portrayal of a drill sergeant.
Honestly, that dude though, I really think he was dealing with some deep-seated issues from the things he went through during the invasion. That dude had issues that at the time nobody was dealing with. But anyways, you've heard of some of the Army shenanigans we play on each other, things like brake light fluid. There's no such thing. Well, my team leader was not the dude you questioned. So when he came up to my driver's hatch, my Bradley, my fighting vehicle, he's like, Bates, I need you to get an exhaust sample right now, First Sergeant. I didn't question it. I grabbed a bag. I was right up there, and I went around. And I went to the company first sergeant, the company commander, the company executive officer, the maintenance platoon section sergeant. And so it took me about a good 15, 20 minutes to realize that 250 dudes were pissing themselves in the mud, laughing at my dumbass running around with a trash bag full of exhaust. I felt so dumb.
One of the things we used to do in kitchens to the really green guys is on their first busy night when they're panicked and nervous, we'd just freak them out by being like, I need you to go to the walk-in and get me the liquid ice now.
The water?
Yeah. Oh, most of them were just too panicked to ever figure out we just wanted water. And so the jokes too, that must add to the brotherhood as well.
It does. You know the old adage, misery loves company. I mean, there's no better way to bond than to do something that sucks with someone. And it doesn't necessarily have to suck, like be awful, but something difficult. Like if you go hiking and, you climb the White Mountains in New Hampshire, physically that's aggressive. But the people you do that with, you become a tight-knit group because you share an experience. And that's all part of, I think that's a crucial part of the human experience. Those things definitely draw us together. And what even I think that draws that bond in particular for people in the military, law enforcement, fire, your first responders, is going through something brutal like combat. Because the dudes I went overseas with, I'm closer to those dudes than some of my own family. But we went through a literal hell together. It's, when you share an experience that extreme, the bonds of, that you have with the people you went through that through intensify, because they also become a huge part of your support system.
Right. And I mean, who can discuss really intimately what you went through more than the people who actually went through it with you? Because they truly can understand, right? No matter how empathetic someone is or well-educated, I can never put myself in that mindset fully. Like I can picture how crazy and terrible things must have been, but I'll never know what that feels like.
No, I got you, man. And I mean, it's one of those unique things about, that veteran community. And I mean, like the other thing that's really cool about it, it even extends a bit to people that you didn't serve immediately next to. As soon as two veterans identify that they've served and stuff like that, it's instant camaraderie and it's an instant connection. And veterans will typically go a bit further out of the way for each other than they would for other people. And a part of it also, and this is obviously going to be diving in a little foreshadowing to the meat of this, a lot of that also, being a combat veteran, I have a very difficult time connecting and relating to regular people. For me, I have to work a lot harder at it, but still at the end of the day, I feel isolated. I don't connect really well with the society that I come back home to. I mean, just look at the state of American politics. And I'm sitting here like, oh my God, you people are so stupid. We have big issues and you're freaking out about X, Y, Z. Because again, my experience, my priorities have shifted, but that's whatever.
That's got to be insanely difficult too, fighting for your country's freedom. And especially last year, watching it be squandered in such, I mean, I hate to say it, and sorry, American listeners, but in such an ignorant way.
And you see, I have opinions on American politics that I won't get much into, because you and I can have that conversation, because you and I like my political views are not a part of my identity, but you talk about politics to the wrong person. And if you're saying that you disagree, they'll think you're attacking their person and they freak out. And social media is the worst for that.
So what year did you actually finally land overseas, and where were you stationed? What was your first job?
Okay. So prior to when I actually landed overseas, I had already held several duty positions within my unit. And through my career, I've had multiple positions. Like it's a constant thing that changes. It's always in flux depending on what the unit.
And that's normal for everyone, yep. Not just your. Okay.
It's normal it was normal for an army infantry. You're a jack of all trades. You do what you're told.
And is that essentially what the infantryman is the jack of all trades to the military?
No, we're the guy. If you need a W on the scoreboard, you send someone like me. We're the tip of the spear. My whole job was to find a fight and get in it and win. And I got very good at it. I would not want to be on the other end of the dudes I trained. I would hate to be that dude.
I mean, you had to have been decent at what you did for us to be sitting here and having a conversation today.
Just lucky. The bad guys get a say too.
So when you landed, did you go straight to Iraq, or
nope,
were you
So the first thing that we did when Fort Hood, we stopped in Kuwait. You get kind of introduced to the theater, because as soon as you land in a combat situation, things change. Immediately, one of the things that goes into effect is General Order Number 1. No alcohol, no sex, no pornography, nothing.
Oh, wow. So no mind deterrence, essentially.
Not those kinds of distractions.
Right, yeah.
Because you get rid of that stuff. The other thing is, I want to say some of that had to do with trying to not, Muslim culture, the way I had it explained at the time, things like pornography were a no-go. And so you don't want to be a terrible guest, even though I think it's pretty safe to say we were terrible guests.
Also, can we just touch on that a little bit as well? You referred to yourself as guests, and I think that's something a lot of people don't realize is even though you're overseas at war with specific people, not everyone there is the enemy.
No, that's true. And the thing is, it can be incredibly frustrating. I connect really well with Vietnam veterans because the Viet Cong didn't wear a uniform. They hit you and then blend into the population. Well, that's exactly what Al-Qaeda in Iraq did. They didn't wear a uniform. They fought the fight they could fight. They could not go toe-to-toe, force on force with the American military. It was not going to happen.
So they were dressed as civilians, not as a militia. Okay.
Yeah, they would wear a dish dash, sandals, typical Arab garb, and throw a little chest rig on with a couple of AK mags. Do their thing, because now all they got to do if they need to run away is drop that shit. That they look like a regular Joe again. Blend right in.
When you're in the mindset too of combat and you're in your full gear, military boots, and you see someone in sandals, my mind wouldn't go to, hey, that guy's on the enemy side. Yeah, no. Nope. So that must be really difficult being on edge all the time.
They absolutely have tradecraft. We do too. So we landed in Kuwait. We were there on December 1st, 2005. 2 weeks later, we were in a place, it was forward operating base, Iskandariyah. Iskandariyah is close to the city of Musaib. It is right on the Euphrates River, and it was right in the Sunni Triangle of Death. That place was nothing short of a meat grinder.
That's the area, too, they don't allow reporters in because it's just too dangerous to escort them, correct?
Yeah, that also, keep in mind, the Triangle of Death was the birthplace of ISIS.
So ourselves are researched in this. I mean, I put the work in, but for the people listening who don't know what the Triangle of Death is, can you just give a quick overview of that?
So the Triangle of Death was this area, it's south of some 30 kilometers south of Baghdad. It was 3 cities that aligned right just on the north side of the Euphrates River. Mahmudiya, Latakia, and the third one loses, I can't remember. I have so many freaking names up there. It formed this triangle area that was just an insurgent hotbed. And that small geographical area churned out some 6,000 casualties in a very short time. And that's a significant number considering that we had several thousand soldiers there. That's a big number. When you hear of a small, maybe a couple hundred square kilometer area churning out thousands of casualties compared to an entire country, that says something. So that's where this area was. FOB Iskandariyah was slightly south of this, but the area that my company was immediately responsible for, I'll refer to it as an AO. It stands for Area of Operations. Our unit's AO was on the opposite side of the Euphrates River of that, but that doesn't mean anything. Those insurgents came on over to our side because on either side of our FOB and then the northern end of my unit's AO, there are bridges that cross that river.
Right.
But they got boats. They can swim. If they want to get over and mess with us, they'll get over and mess with us.
What was your first actual job there then? What were you responsible for?
So my role at that time, I had been a light machine gunner. I carried the M249 squad automatic weapon.
And for Canadians, that's a very big gun.
It's a 5.56 millimeter machine gun. It fires at about a rate of 600 to 900 rounds a minute. And it is one of our chief casualty producing weapons. It's what gives us the upper hand because an infantry platoon carries 6 of those. And then we also have 230 caliber machine guns as well. A squad automatic weapon, that's a big gun. You don't necessarily want it in a house if you're going door to door and clearing. Some units took an opposite stance. They called them room brooms. You know, that you want to talk about a quick way to clear out a room full of bad guys. There it is. When we were out patrolling, I was a Humvee gunner. I would use either my squad automatic weapon or if we had a 30 caliber or a 50 caliber and they needed me in that position, I would shift accordingly.
And what was your responsibility there? Like what was your mission? What were you setting out to do?
So a lot of it, asymmetrical warfare is a very complex subject, and there's people who have like master's degrees in this crap, and a lot of that stuff is way over me and what I even bothered to be worried about.
No, of course, but for the everyman.
What we basically we're told is this area, it's an insurgent hotbed, kill them. And at that time, we were just kind of starting to implement some of the counterinsurgency doctrine, win hearts and minds. It was a very odd period because there's a lot of stress about when you could engage versus when you couldn't. There was a lot of rules of engagement changes. It was a very weird time. Like it could be confusing at times, but basically it said, here's this slice of land, secure it.
Well, and a tough thing too is with media and video game portrayals of war scenes, it's very much, there's always an objective. So let's say in Call of Duty, even if it's just you need to get to the other side of town, there's usually a hostage or a main target. And in the movies, the 20-minute action scene, there's always a specific mission or conflict they're trying to achieve. So to know it's much actually broader than that is, again, kind of what I'm trying to get across speaking with you today. Because, again, I think not to just single out media, but, again, the media portrayal of how these things actually go down is so starkly different from actual reality.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these are people talking about things they have no understanding of because they've never been. And the other thing I think it's safe to say with media today, everyone has a bias. It doesn't matter who it is. Everybody's got an agenda. Everybody's collecting a paycheck, and not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, and that's not always the case. Some people look for things where there aren't. But you look at messaging of things. It's not always just simple reporting of facts.
Right. Well, and a thing you said that was interesting when we spoke before the interview was that I noticed that the American military documents stuff so well. I was actually pretty much able to find where you were and what year based on the divisions and the squads and such that you gave me. But I think the interesting thing you said is you couldn't remember your mission names. And I kind of relate to that too, because I said it in a previous episode where as a chef, you do so many specials and you run so many different things that to you, it's just another night. It's just the job you need to do. So again, it's that kind of portrayal of it being special with a name to the outside person. So it's very interesting to hear to you that you don't actually remember any of the names of the missions.
Yeah, it's one of those things that a mission or an operation name matters for record keeping purposes. But for me, it was just another night out.
And another thing too we discussed that I kind of want to touch on here, you were mentioning your squad's not involvement, but close proximity with the 101st and that situation. Can we touch on, you want to just dive into that a bit for everyone?
Yep. The 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment is a unit out of the 101st Airborne out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky. They were the adjacent unit. So we had a section on the map that we owned. Theirs was right next to us. They were on the north side of the Euphrates River from us. And we'd see them, patrolling up and down the Euphrates. Those dudes over there had a real bad year. There's a book called Black Hearts that was written about their experience. And it's a book, I read it, I cried, because those men were failed. They were given, their leadership failed them through and through, but I won't get into that. But through that year, because of leadership failures and other things that happened, 3 soldiers were in a Humvee alone. The Al-Qaeda and Iraq fighters captured them, killed one of them outright, tortured the other 2. And my unit, as part of a massive sweep of the area, my element of the 4th Infantry Division was part of the major operation that found and recovered those. The following year, a unit out of 10th Mountain Division, 4th Battalion, 31st Infantry, the Polar Bears, they lost a whole squad in that city, because that was the unit that relieved 502nd. That's who relieved them. 9 captured, just gone in a night. And they didn't even do anything wrong. Their leadership did not fail them, not to the same extent as the 101st at that time failed their guys. It was a bad place. So we should, so to kind of give you a very rough timeline, and then we can talk about some individual experiences and things that you want to get into. So I showed up midway through December. We relieved the unit out of the Mississippi National Guard. The first thing that struck me about those dudes, they lived like animals. Like, their NCOs had almost knee-high food trash in their barracks rooms that they were living in. These guys got put through the meat grinder. They all of them had videos of, their dudes on patrol in Humvees, and Humvees getting ripped apart by massive IEDs. These dudes were just beaten psychologically. That was the impression I got coming in. These guys were not okay. Shortly after Christmas, once we had fully taken over combat operations, we had our first guy killed in action. This is a specialist, Eric Forbes. He was killed in an IED blast. He was trapped when the Humvee got flipped over. That almost immediately, that was our intro to, hey, you're in Iraq, dude.
Your friend you've spent 2 years every day with, just like that.
Yeah, he was in our engineer company. He wasn't a dude that I knew particularly well, but our company area is so small. I'd seen him around. I knew who Forbes was. I even said, hey, how's it going, man? I'm a friendly dude. I like to say hi to people. But, just to hear that, and, I'm like, oh, Jesus, we just got here. The enemy wasted no time engaging us. In January, the following month, I was with Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 67th Armored Regiment. We were on a mission. My understanding of the mission is that it was possible the guy we were going to snatch was the one responsible for putting the bomb together that killed Forbes. So we went in there. We found in this dude's house bomb-making materials. He had artillery shells, explosives to pack them with, detonation wiring. He had everything.
So your intel was correct.
Oh, and check it out. He was a captain in the Iraqi police.
So let me just quickly ask about that, because, again, I'm not sure how everything worked over there. The Iraqi police were not enemies of the United States.
Correct.
So he was an insurgent who personally was, but the police were not.
That is correct.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to clarify that.
That one dude was shady.
Yeah.
So, but what it illustrates is that these insurgents, they were in the military, they were in the police. You had no idea who you could or could not trust. And that was also true in Afghanistan, because towards the end of my time, when I corrected you, that 4th Corps, the reason I declined it is because the American advisors that were training Afghani army were unknowingly training Taliban fighters. And when those Taliban fighters saw the chance, they'd shoot their American trainers. And I told them, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to be on CNN, because if one of those dudes points a gun at me, I'm going to drill it.
Whoa.
And I don't need the trouble, because that's all. My luck, CNN would look to they would crucify me.
Well, and that's scary. What a scary thought, training the enemy in your tactics so they are aware of what you're about to do.
Well, I mean, now keep in mind, tactics it's a broad term, because you can actually look up on Google the United States Army Infantry Training Manual.
Well, as I said earlier, again, the U.S. military is very anal with their records. Again, anyone listening, you can go on Wikipedia and you pretty much can read your way documented through any war, any battle. It's very, very impressive.
Oh, absolutely. But these are the kinds of places that, that was the reality of it over there. But anyways, we hit that mission. We snatched this dude up. This dude was compliant. We had him hit flex cuffed, thrown in the back of a Bradley. It's an infantry fighting vehicle, have a 25 millimeter chain gun. And when you really make it angry, it drops a ramp and lets 9 infantrymen out that are going to ruin your day. So we had him in there. He's flex cuffed. He has a burlap hat sack over his head because he does not need to know where he's going. It's for our protection. The dudes around me just start kicking the living crap out of him. And I'm like, hey, stop. Absolutely not. I was told to shut up on multiple occasions. And it culminated with one of the dudes taking a Mossberg 500 shotgun. We use them as breaching weapons. He put up next to the dude's head, racked it so he could hear the weapon like a slug is being put in the chamber. They put the barrel of this gun in the dude's stomach. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? I'm like losing my mind. And they pulled the trigger. There was nothing in it. And I'm like, I'm losing my mind. I'm yelling at these dudes. We ended up getting to another spot just out of town. We all got reorganized. At the time when we got this detainee, they just said, hey, you dudes, sit with this guy until we get out of here and we can get back with our right squads. It was get in where you fit in. When I got to my squad, I couldn't talk to anybody. I was so angry. And then for the next 2 weeks after that, everybody treated me like garbage. Like my team leader, who was the same rank as me, put me on any garbage detail that he could to punish me because I didn't want anything to do with that. The reason I didn't, number one, that's detainee abuse. That's a violation of, in my view, the Geneva Conventions, the law of land warfare. No, he was compliant. He was in our custody. We have a duty and an obligation to safeguard that prisoner. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I ended up talking to a friend of mine because I was so overwhelmed. I couldn't believe this. I have no problem with, doing what I need to do in combat, but I don't have to disrespect my enemy. I would hope my enemy would give me the same courtesy and just finish it quick. I don't, that's not how I roll. I want it over fast. That was uncalled for.
Sides put aside as well. He, in his mind, is fighting for what's right, just as you are. So absolutely, like you said, just the respect that wasn't shown that's very dark, and to be alone through that has got to be tough.
And what I ended up doing is I talked to a buddy of mine in a sister company we trained very closely with. It was one of our tank companies, Charlie Company. I told him what happened. He was a non-commissioned officer. So really he had a duty to report it. And I don't blame him. In fact, it needed to be reported. I wasn't going to be that guy because these were dudes I served with. They were like family, and the old adage, snitches get stitches. And then, my dudes, we all had hand grenades. We all had live ammo. And you know what? You got to sleep sometime. I know that's dark, but these are things that I faced after that because my buddy, that he ended up reporting to his chain of command. And then February 2nd, I got yanked off a tower guard. My commander interrogated me, and it all ended up having to come out. I didn't want to do it. I gave my dudes all the room in the world to save themselves, and they couldn't. So when pressed, they're like, hey, you can either tell me what happened or I'm going to lynch you with them. I'm like, all right, I didn't do this. This is what happened. And that even went to a court martial. That followed me through my whole career. Infantry community, one of the things they don't tell you, it's a small space. So that was like my first real traumatic experience in the military. And I hadn't even been targeted yet. When I went to my next unit, a lot of things kind of happened at once. Within 2 weeks, I was back outside the wire going out to patrol base Carnivore Island. That was where we encountered everything with all the bad stuff. With that first patrol, we were targeted by an IED, 2 vehicles in front of me.
And just one of those terms too, just in case people aren't familiar, IED is
an improvised explosive device. It is a roadside bomb. It's you want to talk about crafty. You want to know what an IED looks like? It can look like a wall. A bomb maker is limited literally by his imagination.
Like they can make it look like a brick in a wall is what you're saying.
Exactly. It's terrifying. It is psychologically terrifying.
What are some unique IEDs that you personally saw? Just a quick list.
So most of the things I saw were things like daisy-chained artillery shells. So what a daisy chain means is you have an artillery shell with an explosive that is then wired to another one, that is then wired to another one. So then when you hit the detonator, all 3 of them go. Now, 155 millimeter artillery shell, the safe distance is 800 meters. If you're inside of 50 meters, you're toast, bro. If you're a dismounted infantry, 155 millimeters in diameter. We lost in March, we lost Corporal Robbie Light. He was a tank driver. 155 millimeter artillery shell detonated dead center underneath a tank. That actually, after we got targeted that first time in February, we get through into March into April. It happened at the end of March. The official death list, I think April 1st for Robbie Light. He really died a couple days prior. We were at the patrol base. They were bringing us chow. This is beginning, like I said, March, April-ish. We heard the explosion at our patrol base. Our patrol base was, we call it Patrol Base Carnivore Island. It was literally a man-made island made by irrigation canals. We kicked the Charlie Company kicked everybody out of it because the insurgents had been using it basically as vacation land. And we told them, if any of you come back, we'll shoot you on sight. This is ours. And it was a house. Our patrol base was a one-story house that had roof access that we built a sandbag guard tower on. And we surrounded that house with tanks and Bradleys with thermal imaging, and we did missions out of there. So anyways, they were bringing us a resupply of chow, batteries, things that we'd needed, and we could hear that thing because they were maybe 5K down the road. And we get out there, they couldn't find the driver's hatch of the tank. It had been blown straight off. The gunner lost part of his foot, and Robbie Light was killed instantly. We were getting into the vehicle, or into the Bradley, cleared the immediate area. We're waiting for recovery assets to come in, to like a wrecker, to come and drag the tank away and stuff, and also to, get Robbie. And what ends up happening, we end up getting the order from our company commander, Captain McFarland, to start searching around the area, start clearing, see if you can find the trigger guy, do something. And it was right at that time the wrecker shows up, and they shine the lights on the tank so they can start recovery, because this is around midnight when this happened. And I happened to glance over at the tank, and all I can see is Robbie down the front slope of the tank and underneath the gun tube. And I'm just like staring at it. I'm like, what the shit? And my squad leader, his name is Staff Sergeant Robert Longacre. He actually died recently in a car accident, of all things, after a 20-year career in retirement. He was literally like, hey, Bates, hey, I need you, dude. Hey, he like grabbed me, like shook me by my Kevlar. And he was like, look, you know what they did? I need you now. Let's go get them. And I'm like, all right. And from at that moment on, I can say that's probably the moment where I think that I really can say I actually like turned off the nice guy. I wasn't close with Robbie, but we were in the same company. I saw him around. I chatted with him. I was trying to build a relationship with him because the other tankers, they loved that guy. Robbie was dependable. He was the kind of guy that you knew once he had his stripes and was a sergeant, he was going to be amazing. The guys that he would train would be experts. That was exactly what you wanted. He was a great guy. And just like that, gone.
Now, before we get back to after the war, how much action, how much combat did you actually see?
My first significant fights, I would call it fairly light. What I ended up with is mostly like hit and run style attacks, a lot of IEDs. I was ambushed one time in Iraq where we had intelligence where an IED was going to be placed. And at the time, I was kind of feeling two roles. I was a saw gunner, and I was also a radio operator. Typically, you don't do those jobs together. But the reason that I got put into that position, about a week prior, my best friend had drowned in a Bradley rollover going to a raid. And I called in his medevac, and did all the crosstalk between our guys on the ground and our air assets to secure a landing zone. And because the whole platoon was in the water, it was me and my buddy Bustich were the only two soldiers actually scanning a sector and pulling any kind of security. We were Humvee gunners. We had machine guns. We had to do that. There was no jumping in. And that's one of the things I struggled with, because my buddy, his name is Private First Class Henry Paul. I loved him like family. And I literally helplessly watched him drown. I could do nothing. But one of the things through therapy and through counseling, EMDR has helped a lot. I did everything that I could. If I had done anything else except what I did, I would have detrimentally impacted the mission. The medevac never would have been called up in a timely way. We never would have gotten the LZ secure as fast as we did. None of those things would have happened. And that has to be okay. Anyways, to get back to the question, my second tour, I was the only one to fire a weapon in my section. And it was a warning shot because we were being tailgated, and I was afraid it might have been a suicide bomber. And all of our vehicles have those signs in English and Arabic, stay back 100 meters or you will be shot. So I threw a tennis ball at this dude. I was like showing him like back, hand motions to back off. I even waved a 50 caliber machine gun at him. And that thing is, a good 5 feet tall, long. I mean, it's big. Everything I could do not to kill that dude. Afghanistan, I saw 3 significant actions. One in particular was Election Day in September of 2010. Our guys, it was an election day. So we had a section out in our area of operations in Afghanistan. We were at a place called Kop Bela. It was in Zabul province. At the time, I was with Eagle Company, 2nd Squadron, 2nd Cavalry Regiment. We were out of Vilseck, Germany. They were out at a place in the middle of our area where they could watch the whole zone and provide mortar coverage to protect the voting station at the village near us. The Taliban started engaging those guys. Oh, before I get to that, we have captured Taliban radios. We can hear everything that they say.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Before those guys left, I was in charge of the command post that day. I was in charge of radios. I also had a raid camera. It's basically a $750,000 thermal camera. You can see a field mouse at 5 kilometers with that thing.
Whoa, cool.
We call him the Eye of Sauron because that's exactly what that sucker is. But anyway, so I was in a unique position to command a lot of the fight too. That's actually what a command post does. Before they stepped out of the base, the Taliban, we hear on the Taliban radios, have the Americans left yet? We know they're going to this place. And they named the correct section we were going to. And the only answer to that is that one of the 200 Afghan National Army guys was a rat in the nest. More like a couple of them. We had at Cap Belo, there was the 50 Americans in my element. And then we also were assisted by about a 200-man Afghan National Army company, as well as a section of Afghan security group forces, like private contractors. So that's haunting. They literally just called the mission. And mind you, the only help where we were in Afghanistan is about a 30-minute helicopter ride away. Ground forces ain't coming unless they're coming in a helicopter. There's no vehicle coming. The road's too heavily mined. Between the stuff left over from the Soviets and whatever the Taliban added to. To hear that haunting call over the net, we had to change the mission on the fly. They get out to their new position. Within an hour and a half, the Taliban fighters started opening up on their position from almost 2 kilometers away using a Russian anti-aircraft weapon. And my guys were pinned down. And here I am on this, I can see this. At the same time that they initiate the attack, they had a mortar position start launching, or a rocket position start launching rockets and hitting the camp. They actually hit our chow hall right next to my command post. So that rung my bell, and then I got pissed off. It turned out what they did is there was no one actually firing these rockets. They set them, they were being fired remotely using a prayer clock to hit, because you can set multiple alarms to hit your multiple prayer times to set off rockets in sync with their ambush.
I mean,
they're crafty.
I was going to say that's fairly ingenious.
Well, think about it. Some of the Mujahideen the fighters were trained by the CIA when they were fighting Soviets from 79 to 89. Some of the Mujahideen became Taliban. Why wouldn't they do that? It makes sense. And even if they weren't trained by the CIA, I mean, you spend time in war, you get good at it.
Well, and you said that one round went off at Chow Hall right beside you. Was there any specific moments that you thought you were going to die? I'm sure there must have been a few, but oh, really?
No, thought I had a mission. We were getting attacked. My guys were getting attacked. So I started to prioritize. The first thing I started doing, I reported everything that was going on to squadron headquarters. That was my first priority. My next thing was getting a fix on where these dudes are. We identified the weapon position. We found the 3 guys serving it. I got us weapon clearance to fire the mission. We have to get authorization to shoot mortars and things like that. It's at the time, the counterinsurgency doctrine authored by General David Petraeus was in full effect. So if there was on an old map of an image of a civilian structure, they wouldn't clear the mission because they wanted to minimize civilian casualties, which, yeah, I get that. But if I'm telling you, I'm looking at that spot and the house is gone because your map is 30 years old, the commander on the ground is always right. And the other thing you might notice from your research, every engagement gets investigated. So they're going to send an officer out to make sure that you did not commit a war crime. I'm at the camp. I see this position. Sergeant Dove calls it in, gets the particulars so that when we can get clearance for the mission, I got it greenlit. We killed those dudes. At the heat of the moment, gotcha. Heck yeah, dude. Then we identified a 4-man aid and litter team going to get them. And then they started trying to get that anti-aircraft weapon in service again. So we repeated the mission and killed them too. Because it's competitive. It really is. Later that night.
It's fight or flight, right? You have to.
Yeah, absolutely. And then once that was done, that was it. We won. That night, though, once I got by myself and it really hit me what I did, I cried. I broke down. I never felt so dirty in my life.
That was the first time you took life?
That I know for a fact that I did.
That you knew, yeah.
Yep. And the reason I felt so terrible is, that I took any pleasure in the heat of the moment. I was incredibly ashamed. And I felt terrible about it. Now, realistically, I honestly, I don't believe that I had done anything wrong so much. I mean, they were using an anti-aircraft weapon against my dudes, and they were going to kill them. I had no choice.
Before we again just wrap up here on this, I noticed one of the things is you refer to anyone by both their names, first and last name. Is that something that the military actually makes you do, or is this just a respect thing that soldiers have for each other? Is this how you remember them?
Well, in the case of Robbie Light, I use his name because he's no longer with us. And for me, it's a, I don't want to forget that. He was a good dude. He never got to meet his daughter. One of the things that I still struggle with, I'm getting a little emotional. I struggle with the fact that I made it out. Because, like I said, Robbie is, I'd make the argument he was a much cooler dude than me. And, that same year, my first tour, one of the first things after that detainee abuse incident, First Sergeant Charles King came to me and he told me, I think you did the right thing. I believe in you. And if anybody messes with you, you send that ass to me. That I drove over the bomb that killed him. I never saw it. It was perfect. It was perfect. There was nothing to see. He got to meet his son once. Much better dude than me. But one of the things that, again, that was something that I've covered extensively in therapy. And I can't say this enough, getting into the real meat of this. I didn't deal with these things for a long time. Towards the time when I had left Canada, when you and I had, become friendly and everything, I was starting to get into a real bad mental health space because I wasn't talking about anything. I wasn't ready to. And honestly, I was still in denial that everything was fine. And I mean, the signs were all there. I had a reputation at Friday Night Magic for being a bit of a dink because I couldn't admit what was wrong with me.
I knew you as Captain America for about the first year before ever being like, "Hey man, what's your actual name?" You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I had some very real anger issues. I had a lot of things bubbling up that I wasn't addressing. And I was taking it out on everything around me. And I wasn't even really, I think, fully aware of it.
Well, and the one thing I like to anyone who's listened to the episodes, they know that I am very respectful with issues like this. So obviously, to everyone listening, Dave and I discussed all these things beforehand. I
Oh,
made
yeah.
sure what we were going to discuss today was okay. And
Oh, yeah.
one of the things that one of the reasons mainly that I wanted to speak with you about the mental health side, the after the war part, is because, again, like you were saying, when we first met, you were dealing with your PTSD, but you weren't really dealing with it yet, where you were still having episodes and flashbacks, and we were hanging out. And I remember every time it would happen, I would ask if you were okay, if you needed to talk. And usually your answer was just asking me to go home, which I was okay with, totally understood. But like you just said, you weren't really dealing with it
Oh, no.
yet.
Well, and I started when I left Kingston, March of 2014. I was starting to have suicidal ideations. So I left St. Lawrence College. I went home to be with family because I was isolated really bad. That's a classic marker of PTSD.
You were living in a house with a couple roommates and you didn't know any of them. So,
Yeah, I didn't. Well, I didn't connect with them. They were all at the time. I was almost 30, living outside of my home country. I didn't have family or anything like that. So obviously, you get in where you can, but I didn't relate to those kids. I mean, they were 18. I wasn't in a good spot. So I got home, and one of my saving graces, honestly, I think, is coming to a place where, I thank God for medical cannabis. Absolutely saved my life then. I didn't start dealing with my PTSD for still, honestly, until about a year ago.
now, big question before you continue. Were you aware that's what you were dealing with, or were you still in denial up to that point?
No, absolutely. I knew what I was dealing with. Just before I went home, I actually sought an emergency meeting with one of the mental health counselors at St. Lawrence College and told them what was going on. So I did look for help. I went to a couple of sessions. Once I got back stateside, I went to a VA clinic in Portland, Maine. And I had attempted counseling several times when I was in the military, and it never stuck because I always just felt like a number. I shared with a counselor watching my friend Paul die, and he was like, "Thank you for sharing." Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. I just opened my heart to you, you piece of shit. Thank you for sharing my ass.
You'd expect a better answer from a stranger in a bar over a drink than that.
Yeah. I that at that point, that was in 2011. It was right after Afghanistan. I hadn't quite gone to Fort Drum yet. And I terminated it right then and there. I was done. I didn't go to counseling again until about a year ago.
Oh, wow. So about...
Oh no, 2 years ago I tried once with I went to the Portland VA clinic, and that guy, I couldn't connect with him. He'd never been in the military even.
Almost a full 10 years between therapy.
Yep. So I terminated stuff with him, went off the rails again because my PTSD, depression, and things going on in my personal life. I attempted suicide 3 times in 2019, and I had just had my son born, and that's led to my mental health has led to a very complicated personal situation. My saving grace in the last year, honestly, I spent a week in a VA psychiatric facility in Bedford, Mass, because of my last attempt. But the thing is, I went to actually the Lewiston Veterans Center. My therapist there, he specializes in EMDR therapy.
And that is?
It's eye movement. I forget what the R is, but it's a dissociation therapy. And what it basically is you hold on to, in my session, I hold on to a set of sensors with an alternating vibration.
Okay.
And then what we do is we'll go through a traumatic event. He'll have me go through, describe it or think about it in order. Like he'd have me think about it in order, go through the experience again. And then as I'm doing this, there's the alternating current of vibration. And then what he would do is he would ask me to consider some pointed questions about it. And I didn't talk about it. It's just something I rattled over. And then we'd talk after. And then we'd go to another of these sessions. And through that, that's how I was able to come to, when First Sergeant King died. I was able to, in that instance, one of the things I'd struggled with is that I felt like I couldn't do more. I didn't do enough.
Right.
But at that time, I was in our patrol was very large in size. We had some 8 or 9 vehicles, including a tank and 2 Bradleys. I mean, we were rolling heavy. We had large crew served weapons. We looked intimidating. When everything happened, when Paul died, I took over. I tried to do the same thing because I thought I was in a position to make a difference. But no, there were senior leaders around. They didn't need me. I needed to scan a sector and do one small thing as a part of the larger effort. And I struggled with that, I felt like I needed to do more. I wasn't in a position to do more. There were people in much better control and much better positions to manage everything than I was. At that time, I needed to be Specialist Bates, scan this sector, and keep our patrol secure. And that has to be okay. At some point, I needed to get to that place where I could admit there wasn't anything else to do. That has to be enough. And I struggled with that. I still do. I miss First Sergeant King. That dude was the leader I emulated through the rest of my career. He was hard but fair. If you were doing the right thing, he would fight for you. It didn't matter who was angry with you. If you were doing the wrong thing, you knew it. But he was the example you followed. He didn't do one thing and say another. He led by example and from the front. And that was something I admired about the guy.
That's a great legacy to keep going in his honor. I mean, if you adapt those lifestyles and those principles, and like you said, he's the one you looked up to as a role model, as leadership, that alone, you're doing your part. In my opinion, they say that you die twice, right? When you stop breathing, and then when someone says your name for the last time. So
yep.
In that, you're keeping his memory alive. And I mean, nothing but respect. And again, you're so passionate and respectful for the people you've lost. And I think that's such a big thing that must play into the survivor's guilt as well. But would you say what would how does it balance out the people you know and the people you don't know, taking lives and losing your friends? Do they weigh on you in the same way, or do they affect you differently?
I'd say it's a little different. I mean, loss is loss and it sucks the same. When I was in 10th Mountain, I met a kid that I had ended up training. His name is Nick Silverberg. Nick was a great kid. He was young. He had struggled with heroin abuse as a young teenager, 13, 14 years old. He got himself clean, joined the military to get away from it, injured his back, told his physicians, hey, I can't have opiates. I'm an addict. I can't do that. Well, when you twist your back, you have a significant back injury. Sometimes, because it's not the military, you can't use cannabis. That's not an option. And so he ended up in a full relapse. It ended up costing him his military career because the Army in 2000, what is it, 15, 16, 16, I came home. It cost him his military career. At that time, the Army, zero tolerance. If you fail a urinalysis and test positive for drugs, you are done.
And is that a dishonorable discharge?
General. So you don't get completely screwed, but on employment applications, there is a question, did you serve in the U.S. military? Yes or no? If so, did you receive any discharge other than honorable? If so, what? And why? So it haunts you. Now, a general isn't bad. It's going to ask questions. And if it's used, realistically, an employer is going to use discretion. If they ask, hey, what was it for? Oh, I smoked pot. Now, they can absolutely check that.
Now, was your discharge general or honorable?
Honorable. My service ended because I did not re-enlist. That's it.
Okay, right.
Yep, that's totally an option. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right. So when it comes to the battle with the mental health as well, is there things that you put off, let's say for therapy or medication, just things in general you were afraid of? And if so, what advice do you have for people who are going through similar things, either PTSD or CPTSD?
Before I answered that, I never finished answering the difference in loss. When Nick overdosed and died, I went to his funeral. It definitely hit me different than the guys I lost in combat. The feeling of loss is still there, but it's a very different feeling. It's not as intimate for sure because you weren't there at that moment. It's a powerful moment when you're there when the loss occurs. It is very different. But then to answer the following question now, the biggest thing that I was afraid of was just that talking about it wouldn't make a difference because it hadn't before and I was treated like a number. So why trust a busted system? I wrote it off. And that's a mistake. The gentleman that I work with now as my counselor, he's a Navy veteran. He didn't see combat like I did, but we share a connection. He knows right off the bat, he knows about the rigors of training because he's gone through some variety of it. He's at least experienced some degree of the suck.
That family we mentioned earlier in the podcast, that exactly sense of family.
The military is literally the largest dysfunctional family in the world. It really is. So, the big thing that I would tell people is, as much as it sucks, keep looking for a good fit. It's out there. You have to put in the work too. If you want to get better, you have to do your part. It's daunting. It sucks. Trauma's trauma. It doesn't matter if it's combat related. It doesn't matter if it's childhood emotional abuse. Trauma is trauma. The human brain processes it all in the same exact way. It doesn't matter. Look for help. Look for, build a support system. Talk to people. The things that we struggle with, I'm a very candid guy. I always kind of have been. I probably am maybe a little guilty of oversharing. But, either way, the thing is, if you want to process something and really truly deal with it and heal it, you have to talk about it. You have to get it out there. You have to work through the things. You have to, and so having an objective, outside voice to kind of guide that discussion. Because I tell you what, we are our own harshest critics. I like to call that little voice that tells you how bad you suck. I like to call that the itty bitty shitty committee. And our own personal, shitty committees are particularly good at beating us up.
Well, they know just how to get under our skin.
Yeah, because it's us. We are our worst enemies. So my advice to anyone is, keep looking, you know, talk to your friends and family, it can be risky. And, know going in that your family isn't going to have a perfect answer. Nobody has a perfect answer. But sometimes just knowing, being able to talk about something and have someone tell you, hey, I don't relate immediately, but I love you. I wish what can I do? Do you need, how can I help you? Just the offer, that knowing that someone's reaching out to try to connect, to try to help, it can mean the world. And someone is different. It doesn't necessarily have to be a counselor. If someone has a faith, it could be their pastor, or, whoever your variant of it is, depending on your faith or whatever. It can be anyone. It's about building that support system. Another person I was able to talk about Afghanistan with was my grandfather. He has also been in that position where he had to make that mortal decision. So when I told him, hearing it from him, someone that I looked up to, because I'd always looked at my pop as having his act together, so to hear him be like, hey, I get it. You didn't do anything wrong. There's no shame in being happy that your friends are alive. There's no shame in being happy you won a fight. There's no shame in that. You're alive. That's okay. Hearing that from him, he's no counselor. He has no degree in mental health. But that acceptance made a huge difference. You never know where you're going to find it unless you try. You have to look. So my advice, the other thing is, understand that mental health, it's a multi-tiered approach to fixing an issue. So in addition to counseling, I do use medical cannabis. I also found I have a passion for growing. I have a pretty epic garden underneath me right now. And I've even found a wonderful symmetry in gardening because, I got really good at war and, the taking of life. I would say I got to be expert at it. It's actually kind of nice knowing I can grow something. I can facilitate that life. I can develop something else. I like. Mhm. Yeah. So now that's not going to work for everybody, but work for me. What works for what anyone, another recommendation I would make to people with trauma, things with structure help a ton. Have a regimented routine. My garden, if I grow in both coco coir and I grow in deep water culture hydroponics. These systems, my deep water culture systems, require intense attention to detail. Mixing nutrients is very procedural. These are all things that me as a former soldier, that stuff that's right up my alley, man. That was my bread and butter for years. War is very procedural, believe it or not. So the military is very structured. These are things that I immediately latched onto. Knowing that I have to go down for my plants in coco coir. I have to feed those 2-3 times a day, depending on what I'm trying to do with those plants. That means I have to build routine. It's something to look forward to. These are things that are crucial with mental health. It doesn't have to be gardening. It could be jogging. It can be fishing. It can be whatever that escape is, but you have to find that thing that requires you to do another thing, to build that concept, build a routine. Routines are crucial for anything, but having a multi-pronged approach to one's wellness is important. No one thing is going to do it. It doesn't work that way. Trauma's complex.
Well, and I haven't really touched much on my issues, and I'm not going to get into it on this episode as I don't want to take the light away from what we've discussed on your end today. But in my relation to what you just said, I absolutely agree. And I personally have been deterred from therapy and medication for the same reasons you did, where the few times I've looked and gone to therapists, they've just not been right for me. And that would deter me to ever going to one again. And it's kind of a cycle that's repeated a few times, but
it's a vicious cycle.
It's a vicious cycle. And to just, like you said, have someone hear your most personal and intimate things and to respond in a way that just falls flat. It's tough, but absolutely, like David said, you need to stick it out. I mean, I'm, goodness, 12 years out of my battle with cancer now, and I'm kind of just touching and getting in tune with what my actual mental health issues are. It's taken that long. And so, like David said, you got to stick through it, and it might not be right at first, but there are outlets, there are people there to help.
Absolutely. Again, a part of my routines that again, having things to look forward to. We're a little defunct at the moment. Life has gotten a little hectic here with COVID and everything else. But I have a weekly D&D night. I am Karavek. I am a lawful evil sorcerer. I am warlock rather. I'm terrible. But I have that to look forward to. I have that connection, and I know that being a veteran, I'm kind of isolated anyways. I don't really connect with people, but I'm a friendly guy. I want to be personable. Before the military, you know how I am. I like to be around. I like to be social. But relating to people can be tough sometimes. But I have to put the work in. Not everybody is in the military. Not everybody has that experience, those experiences. And friendships and relationships are a huge part of mental health. You have to have good relationships and things outside of your immediate home. Humans are social beings. That's important. So talking to other people. I mean, these guys are all much younger than me, but I mean, I never got to experience D&D. These guys were looking for someone to actually get a game off. So yeah, and I was all about it. So putting in the work was gratifying. To just hanging out with regular people.
Well, and this channel is, we're D&D friendly here at the Bomb, but just like you said too, finding those people where me and you were very similar in the sense that our mask outside might have a smile on it, but it's very important to find those people who can peek under it to make sure the actual expression matches the one on the outside, because we both have smiles on a lot of the time, but that may not be what's underneath at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. And when you look at suicide statistics and even some of our celebrities, I mean, who saw Robin Williams taking his life? I mean, it's one of those things that, I mean, sometimes suicide doesn't have a warning sign. My second tour in Iraq, we had a replacement come in. He came to the tour late, right out of basic training. Nobody knew anything was wrong. Didn't show any signs of anything. Nobody was messing with him. I mean, there was a thorough investigation, but just randomly one night, guy took a SWAT automatic weapon, shot himself in the chest 3 times. We rushed to try to get him to the green zone because we were in Baghdad at the time. That's where my unit was. Get him to a major surgical hospital. His family didn't even know anything was going on. Nobody knew a thing. It was just sudden. And, again, things that, there's people out there I know that'll listen to this and are probably, maybe they're struggling with those same kind of things. Don't think for one second that it's going to solve a problem. All it's going to do, you're going to leave a big empty hole for someone else that cares. Talk, reach out, anything. I mean, for the love of God, hell, I mean, if anybody's suffering, look me up. I'll roll you a doobie and we'll talk about it. Anything to stop that. Because, I mean, if I'd done that, if I had succeeded, that would have been the biggest mistake of my existence. And I mean, in the heat of the moment, it can be, I mean, that's maybe something for another time. You're never, one of the things that keeps me going, it's a mantra from the military, you're never out of the fight. You're never out. Find something that keeps you going. Hunt your good stuff. There's good stuff out there. Even at the worst things that I've gone through in the last 2 years, I've always had a family that loved me. And that was one that maybe not everybody has that good thing. I was fortunate enough to have that. I woke up, as silly as it might sound, but hey, if you're upright, if you got up, you saw the sunshine, hey, that's a good thing, man. You made it another day. If that's your good thing, anything to keep from going down that dark road. But the big thing is it starts with talking, and and like you touched on, it can be really awful to share something very deeply personal, get a thank you for sharing. And that in and of itself can be traumatizing, because it certainly shook me out of the notion of ever doing that again for the better part of a decade.
Well, honestly, just what you said there, I couldn't think of a stronger place to wrap up this conversation, a more hopeful and inspirational way to end the heaviest conversation we've had on the pod so far. David, I want to thank you not only for sitting down with us today and being so open, so honest, so straightforward for the listeners, but for everyone who can't say it, thank you for your service, man.
It was honestly the greatest privilege of my life, and I'm really honestly, sincerely and truly grateful for this opportunity. And it's like I told you before, if my story can help anybody, I felt that I had both a duty and a responsibility to try and help. Because you and I, we know what it's like to suck, you know. But like I said, you're never out of the fight. Nobody's ever alone. Keep your, stay in the fight. You're there. You can make it.
As we reflect on what was discussed today, I will be ending this episode a bit differently. Please join me in a moment of silence to honor all those discussed on today's episode, as well as those lost in war who are personal to you.